Let's slow this down and define the real problem. This is not just about how much the United States spends on defense. It's about what kind of military America is trying to build and who it is preparing to face. For 2 decades, U.S. defense planning was shaped by counterterrorism, smaller wars, limited enemies, controlled costs. That era is over. What replaces it is competition with states that can match and in some areas surpass American capabilities. That shift changes everything. Modern deterrence requires advanced aircraft, missile defense, space systems, cyber capabilities, and a navy large enough to operate globally. None of this is cheap. None of it scales slowly. At the same time, the Pentagon has been squeezed by inflation, efficiency drives, and an industrial base that often promises more than it delivers. So the gap between ambition and reality has been growing quietly year after year. Trump's proposal forces that gap into the open. It asks a blunt question: can incremental budgets support transformational goals? And once that question is asked, the past becomes impossible to ignore. Let's rewind and see how we got here. To understand why this moment feels so abrupt, you have to look backward. After the Cold War, the United States built a military designed for dominance without urgency. Budgets fluctuated, but the assumption was stability. No rival could truly challenge American power. Efficiency mattered more than speed. Precision mattered more than mass. Then came the post-9/11 era. Defense spending rose, but it flowed toward counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and regional conflicts. The United States perfected the ability to fight weaker adversaries, not industrial powers. Meanwhile, long-term modernization slowed, shipyards aged, production lines thinned, supply chains hollowed out. By the time China emerged as a full-spectrum competitor, the system was already strained. Inflation quietly eroded purchasing power. New platforms became more complex, more expensive, and slower to deliver. Even flat budgets became cuts in disguise. That's why recent Pentagon reductions didn't signal retreat, they signaled tension, a system trying to reconcile 20th century processes with 21st century threats. Trump's proposal doesn't break from this history. It collides with it, and once history meets pressure, something always snaps. That snap comes next. The first snap didn't come with explosions. It came with spreadsheets. One of the earliest moves of the incoming administration was an across-the-board cut, about 8% of the Pentagon's projected spending, roughly $50 billion a year erased on paper. More reductions followed, sold as efficiency, another $5 to $11 billion shaved off. On the surface, this looked like discipline, even restraint. But look closer, and a contradiction appears. At the same moment the administration was cutting, it was inheriting a defense budget already weakened by inflation, a flat number that bought less every year. A military asked to do more, with systems that arrived later, cost more, and delivered less than promised. Then came the FY 2026 request, $848.3 billion, slightly below the previous proposal. In real terms, a retreat until Congress stepped in with an extra $150 billion through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This wasn't chaos. It was collision between fiscal control and strategic reality. If you're trying to understand why the jump to $1.5 trillion feels so violent, this is why the pressure had been building quietly. And pressure, when contained too long, doesn't release gently. It bursts. What matters now is where that force is actually going. What you're seeing is not impulse. It's a system revealing itself. The hidden mechanism is this: modern military power no longer scales linearly. You don't add 10% capability with 10% more money. You leap or you fall behind. And leaps are expensive. Take missile defense, space systems, advanced aircraft, naval expansion. These are not upgrades. They are ecosystem rebuilds. Entire supply chains, specialized labor, long lead components, decades of underinvestment condensed into urgent timelines. That's why flagship ideas matter here. A Golden Dome for America is not a single project. It's an architecture, sensors, interceptors, command networks stretching across space, land, and sea. Over time, that alone could cost trillions. The same logic applies to a new generation fighter, an expanded fleet, and rapid fielding precision systems meant to deter a peer adversary, not insurgents. Money becomes the forcing function. Not because it guarantees success, but because without it, failure is certain. Yet here's the uncomfortable part. The defense industrial base has struggled even under lower demands. Delays, cost overruns, missed targets, more spending without reform, risks amplifying inefficiency instead of power. That's the real gamble. And when that gamble meets reality, the consequences don't stay abstract. They hit hard. That's where we go next. The second rupture is already visible. It sits inside factories, shipyards, and production lines that were never built for urgency. Fighter jets arrive years late. Submarines fall behind schedule. Costs climb while output stalls. Not because of one failure, but because the entire system has been stretched past its design limits. This is why Trump's announcement didn't come alone. On the same day, he signed an executive order aimed squarely at defense contractors. No stock buybacks. No corporate distributions, at least not while contracts underperform. That move matters because it signals a shift from trust to enforcement, from partnership to pressure. If this is political theater, it fades. If it's enforced, it reshapes incentives across the defense industrial base. Suddenly, delays carry consequences. Underperformance has costs. Profit is tied not just to contracts won, but to promises kept. This is the second crisis, not about money, but about execution. Because a $1.5 trillion budget cannot compensate for a system that cannot deliver. And the risk now is stark. Either reform accelerates alongside spending, or scale magnifies failure. That choice is being made right now, quietly, inside procurement offices and boardrooms. And its impact won't be felt in Washington first. It will be felt by you. And this is where the story stops being abstract. Because when defense budgets explode, you don't experience them as line items. You feel them as trade-offs. You feel them when public debates turn into zero-sum choices. Security versus social spending. Long-term protection versus immediate relief. You also feel them more subtly. When inflation eats away at purchasing power, when uncertainty rises, when global tension translates into higher energy prices, market volatility, and a sense that the world is becoming less predictable. But there's another side you're rarely shown. If deterrence fails, you pay far more through instability, crisis, and conflict. History is unforgiving on this point. Weakness is often cheaper at first. It is always more expensive later. That's why this moment matters. Not because of Trump, not because of a number, but because the choices being made now shape the risks you will live with for decades. If this analysis helps you see the system more clearly, pause for a second. Share it. Stay engaged. Understanding is the first layer of security. Because what happens next doesn't stop at America's borders. It radiates outward. Once the United States moves, the world recalibrates. A defense budget of this scale is not just an internal decision. It's a signal, loud, unmistakable to allies and rivals alike. To partners in Europe and Asia, it says America intends to remain the backbone of the existing order. To competitors, especially China, it signals preparation for long-term rivalry, not episodic tension. That signal travels fast. Allies adjust their own spending. Supply chains realign. Regional balances harden. Arms races don't begin with declarations. They begin with expectations. And expectations are shaped by numbers like this. At the same time, global markets watch closely. Massive defense outlays reshape industrial priorities, labor flows, and technological investment. Innovation accelerates, but so does fragmentation. Economic blocs grow more defensive. Trust thins. The world becomes more segmented, more strategic, less forgiving. This is how military budgets quietly become geopolitical architecture. And here's the paradox. The stronger the deterrent, the higher the stakes of miscalculation. Power stabilizes, but it also narrows margins for error. So when we talk about $1.5 trillion, we're not just talking about American security. We're talking about the kind of world that emerges from this decade. And that brings us to the hardest question of all. What happens next? The future now branches into three paths. None of them are theoretical. The first is the successful transformation. Spending is paired with reform. The industrial base expands. Delays shrink. New systems are fielded faster, cheaper, and at scale. Deterrence holds. The United States stabilizes competition with China not through dominance, but through credibility. Expensive, but effective. The second path is managed drift. Money flows, but reform lags. Some gains appear, others stall. Budgets grow, outcomes remain mixed. Deterrence becomes uneven, strong in some domains, fragile in others. This is the most likely scenario. Not failure, not success, just persistent risk. The third path is the most dangerous. Scale without control. Spending surges. Inefficiencies multiply. Contractors adapt to money, not performance. Systems arrive late or not at all. Rivals exploit gaps. The illusion of strength replaces real capability. History shows where this leads. Here's the deeper truth. Systems don't collapse suddenly. They erode quietly behind impressive numbers. Which future emerges depends less on the headline figure than on follow-through, on discipline, on whether power is treated as a responsibility or as spectacle. And that brings us to the final question. What should you take away from all this? This is the part most discussions avoid. A $1.5 trillion defense budget is not a verdict. It's a test of whether the United States can still convert resources into results, whether it can reform systems built for another era, whether power is being accumulated for stability or for symbolism. Money alone has never been the deciding factor in history. Institutions are, incentives are, discipline is. When those align, even limited resources can shape the world. When they don't, even vast sums evaporate. So don't let the number hypnotize you. Look instead at execution, at accountability, at whether reform keeps pace with ambition. If you want to understand where this leads, stay engaged. This isn't a one-off decision, it's the opening move of a longer transformation. What comes next will matter even more than what was just announced. If this analysis helped clarify the system behind the headline, share it, challenge it, continue the conversation. Because the future of power is not decided by budgets alone. It's decided by what societies demand in return.